Gen Z doesn't want to work anymore, and as their millennial defense lawyer, I've made nearly 300 videos now explaining why they're absolutely right for not wanting to work. But I've just now realized that throughout all these literally hundreds of videos now, I've yet to cover perhaps the single most important factor in all of this, the AI revolution. I've been hesitant to talk about this because I wanted to take the time to ensure my facts and information would be accurate. Up until recently, the AI revolution was a futuristic sci-fi movie, not something we have to address in the present moment. And you never know exactly how something will play out until it actually happens. Even the most skilled professionals, whose job it is to make future predictions, don't always get everything right. You had some people making incredibly sci-fi dystopian predictions about AI. You had others saying it was all overhyped. I didn't know which side to believe until about a week ago. The horrible Gen Z job market once again hit the news headlines last week when it was reported that this year's college graduates are graduating into perhaps the worst job market ever. This is because AI has already replaced 14% of jobs today, and this is only going to get much worse. All around the internet, and even in my own comment section, people have been telling me that AI has already replaced a ton of jobs today. This is no longer some sci-fi fueled prediction of the future. This is something that is already happening right now. Now, keep in mind, the job market was already horrible even before AI took over, as we've all painfully experienced. So the stakes are even higher now. Now, unlike most people, I don't believe the future is totally cooked. I don't believe AI has to be this dark dystopian force that takes all our jobs and leaves us homeless. Don't get me wrong, it certainly can do that. In fact, I would even say, based on the current direction we're headed in, it actually will do that. But it doesn't have to. We can still right the ship. There is a world in which AI frees us from the shackles of human labor and creates a post-scarcity, post-labor world in which we're freed from the horrible jobs we hate and we're able to pursue what we really want to do in our one and only life on this earth. But in order to get to the second of these two futures, we have a lot of serious problems to solve and a lot of serious solutions to figure out. Part 1. The problems. Hey guys, just wanted to say real quick, thank you all so much for 20,000 subscribers now. Wow, I seriously am so grateful. I have no words, like we're just growing so fast right now. It feels like just yesterday we hit 10K. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks, and if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of all these evil corporate lies. Kydland's law states that once you can clearly write down the problem, the matter is already half resolved. This law, once I learned about it, has become an absolute game changer in my personal life. How can you solve a problem if you don't even know what it is? And so before we get to all the potential solutions, let's first clearly define and establish all the problems we need to solve. The whole point of AI or any machine intelligence or robots is to do all the work so that humans don't have to. This isn't just my opinion. This is the actions of capitalist CEO billionaires themselves. They're not hesitating to replace workers with AI, as that's what's going to be more profitable for them. Now, in any sane universe, we would all be celebrating and applauding this. Being freed from the jobs we hate should be a good thing. But our society is so obsessed with forcing everyone to work that we just can't wrap our minds around the fact that one day we don't have to work anymore and that this is actually a good thing. So as a result, I've heard a ton of cognitive dissonance fueled arguments as to why we'll still have to work even in the age of AI. We're going to go through and thoroughly debunk these one by one so that rather than wasting time with these arguments in the comments, we can actually get to talking about actual solutions. Argument number 1, the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people who think we'll still have jobs to do in the age of AI like to invoke the Industrial Revolution as a historical parallel. There was a similar narrative going on in the Industrial Revolution, as a lot of people back then thought machines were going to take everyone's job too, but that didn't happen. Now, on the surface level, if you don't understand anything about technology, this argument is already pretty easy to debunk. A steam engine and an AI supercomputer are fundamentally two very different things. One replaces physical work, the other replaces mental work, but eventually will replace physical work too. A steam engine and other industrial revolution technologies don't scale off one central location. What I mean by this is that if a million people need steam engines, then millions of people have to physically build all these steam engines. You can't just build one steam engine and have everyone use it across the whole internet. ChatGPT, on the other hand, is the opposite. A relatively small group of AI engineers work on it, and millions of people can now use it. You don't need millions of AI engineers to work on millions of copies of it to send out to millions of individual people. This makes it more efficient and more scalable. However, it also means it creates far less jobs. The people who invoke the Industrial Revolution don't really put any actual thought into their argument, I've noticed. If you ask them for specific mechanisms as to how AI will actually create as many jobs as the Industrial Revolution, they won't be able to answer it. All they'll be able to do is resort to an intellectually lazy, but history always repeats itself. It happened before, so surely it's going to happen again, right? Basically, they try to turn this into a historical argument rather than one based on current facts and reality. But here's where they run into an even bigger problem. Their whole argument is based on history, but if you do any actual in-depth historical research, you'll see that even the historical argument falls apart. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I hypothetically were to concede that an AI supercomputer and an Industrial Revolution steam engine are going to have the exact same economic impact. Same jobs created, same jobs lost. I don't, and as I already proved, this is absolutely not the case. But let's just say I give them this massive concession. They still lose the debate, even on their own historical argument, and here's why. You see, there was one massive, unprecedented socioeconomic shift that occurred from the Industrial Revolution that we're never going to see again. For much of human history, the world grew at a very slow, steady, and predictable rate. It took almost 10,000 years for the global human population to reach 1 billion. Then this happened. Boom. It took only 100 years for the population to double to 2 billion. Now, if you've paid any attention to the world recently, you'll know that there's no way we're going to have these explosive levels of population growth again anytime soon. So, given the insane population explosion that happened during the Industrial Revolution, it's important to ask this question. What effect does this have on the economy? When the population surges to this level, it has a very interesting effect on the economy. More people means more consumers, more demand, and thus more jobs. You know how in 2025, it's damn near impossible for even a 25-year-old adult with a master's degree to get a job? Well, back in the Industrial Revolution, it was not only easy, but even the norm for 5-year-old children to get a job at a factory. You didn't even need to finish grade school to get a job back then, and now you need to send hundreds of applications, and you might hear back from one if you have a PhD. Now, if you're listening to this as a Gen Z or millennial struggling to get a job in 2025, you might find yourself wishing you were born during the Industrial Revolution. But wait, not so fast. You see, these jobs came with a major catch. More people means more consumers and more demand for products. But there's a major dark flip side to this as well. More people also means more competition for jobs, and thus much less leverage and bargaining power for workers over employers. Sure, it was easy to get a job, but a horrible, low-paying, dangerous one with absolutely insane hours. Employers had the leverage to pay you as little and treat you as horribly as they wanted because if you refused or complained, well, the rapidly growing population meant that they could easily find somebody else who would work for harder and cheaper than you. There are many documentaries on YouTube detailing just how horrible Industrial Revolution jobs were, so I'm not going to get into it too much here. We're talking 12 to 16-hour shifts, barely enough pay to survive, workplace fatality rates as high as 9%, and even little children often being maimed or killed on the job. So I think by now it's obvious why the Industrial Revolution is a horrible argument. Not only are the technologies completely different from today, but the population growth and literally hundreds of other socioeconomic variables are totally different between now and back then. We're not even comparing apples to oranges at this point. This is literally like comparing apples to great white sharks. And this is the perfect segue into debunking the broader argument that this is all a part of. The whole idea that AI will destroy jobs, but it will also create jobs. Again, the people who make this argument can't give you any specifics. What jobs will it create? How many jobs will be created? How long will it take to create these jobs? Just like with the Industrial Revolution, it's just another lazy blanket statement with no thought or nuance behind it. Yes, it is true that AI will create jobs. In fact, it already has. But this is the problem with these types of lazy blanket statements. What is the ratio of how many jobs it's created versus how many it's destroyed? If it creates a few hundred AI engineer jobs, but it displaces a few million other jobs, this isn't an actual solution now, is it? But there's an even far bigger problem beyond just this. Let's just say hypothetically, for the sake of argument, that AI eventually creates as many jobs as it displaces. Let's say even it happens at a perfect 1-to-1 ratio. This still doesn't address the fact that the jobs it would create are going to be drastically different than the ones it displaced. Humans are not robots, no pun intended. We can't just magically snap our fingers and change careers at the drop of a hat. In 2018, when Andrew Yang was running for president, he noticed that in the not-so-distant future, truck drivers were about to all be replaced by AI and self-driving trucks. The absurd solution most people were proposing at the time was to just retrain these truck drivers to become AI software engineers instead. Again, it's already absurd to think that these jobs are going to get created and replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio to begin with, but it's even more absurd to think that you can just magically wave a magic wand and turn a truck driver who already didn't like school that much to begin with into an AI programmer overnight. So if you're against UBI and you're so hell-bent on forcing everyone to work, what is your plan for all these truck drivers, people who work tirelessly for decades to uphold our society when they lose their jobs? The truth is, most people who are against UBI don't have a plan. Their idea of magically converting every truck driver into an AI programmer is patently absurd, and they know it too. Their actual plan, if you can even call it that, is to just let truck drivers and the millions of other people who lose their jobs starve to death on the street. They just don't have the balls to publicly and honestly admit it, which is why they resort to this cutesy, but AI will create jobs too. The Industrial Revolution did, as a distraction. This is why it's important we burn this delusional copium that AI will just create as many jobs as it replaces. We're rapidly hurling towards a world where there simply won't be enough jobs for everyone, and we need serious, actual solutions. Part 2, the solutions. The AI revolution has exposed a very obvious fundamental flaw in our general cultural mindset around work. I really think if any alien race were to see how we were reacting to AI replacing our jobs, they would absolutely laugh at how absurd we were. If machines are replacing human labor, shouldn't we all be celebrating the fact that we're about to be freed from the toil of human labor? The reason we're not is for the simple fact that we've been so thoroughly brainwashed and conditioned by society to believe that our lives are inherently worthless without a job. And so we've set up all our economic systems to reflect that. So what happens when technological progress gets to a point where work is no longer needed? Well, we simply can't just wrap our mind around the facts that maybe, just maybe, we can enjoy life for once without having to work. But what if we could, just for 1 second, imagine what a life without labor would look like? This is what futurists like David Shapiro and Julia McCoy call the post-labor economy. Solution number 1, UBA. You've probably heard of UBI by now, especially if you follow this channel. UBA, or Universal Basic Assets, however, could potentially be a new and improved, even better version of it. Here's what it is. AI is the technology that will rapidly push humanity forward. It's also something all of us contributed towards making by creating LLMs. Language learning models like ChatGPT learn to communicate by studying countless human writings and conversations all over the internet, including yours and mine. And so, since we all contributed to the advancement of AI, it only makes sense we all receive a dividend of its profits. Basically, all of us have the right to be the shareholders of AI companies, not just the current evil shareholders we all know and love. So all of us receive some stocks, assets, and dividends from AI companies as a birthright. Yes, as a birthright. Not only did they take our jobs, but we all contributed to language learning models who learn to communicate by studying our online conversations. And so we are all absolutely entitled to a share of the profits. This is potentially a huge upgrade over UBI because it inherently answers the question of how do you pay for it? One thing I've realized is that moving towards a post-labor economy isn't going to be that hard from a practical standpoint. AI will eventually replace enough human jobs, it's just a matter of when and not if. The hard part is going to be undoing centuries of cultural brainwashing of our mentality around work. Gen Z haters love throwing around the whole, but how do you pay for it, as a cheap, low-hanging fruit argument against UBI. So by shifting to UBA instead of UBI, the answer is already in the name itself. Solution number 2, neo-homesteading. UBI or UBA would be a great start and is the foundation of a post-labor economy. However, it's important to remember that money at the end of the day is just a means to acquire resources and not a resource itself. So reducing our dependency on money is very important too. And this is where the art of neo-homesteading comes into play. Neo-homesteading is simply the art of self-sufficiency with modern advanced techniques to reduce the need for work even further. Aquaponics is probably the most interesting method I discovered during my research for this video. Aquaponics is a new and creative form of farming that combines fish and plants in a closed-loop ecosystem. The fish produce waste, which gets absorbed by the plants for fertilizer. The plants then filter the water back to the fish, and the process repeats itself. The work that is done is mostly done up front to install the system, but after that, it's very minimal. I'm talking a few hours of work per week to feed the fish, harvest the plants, and clean the fish tank. Far less work than any 9-to-5 job. And here's the cool part. AI will definitely get to a point where it figures out how and when to feed the fish as well, so it could get to a point where you could get free fish and vegetables every day without having to work at all. Solution 3, a parallel economy. One big lie we've all been brainwashed to believe over the years is that something has to make money in order to produce value. This just isn't the case at all. In fact, many things that make money, such as drugs, tobacco, and alcohol, actively hurt society. On the other hand, mentorship, volunteering, and community service absolutely contribute value to society, yet nobody gets paid for it. This just proves that this capitalist system of determining the value of everything based purely on economic output and GDP numbers is inherently flawed, and it will become even more outdated in the age of AI. So this is where we need a new system, a parallel economy, where people are rewarded for and compensated for all the ways they contribute outside of just generating profits for a company. Now, admittedly, this would be an immense challenge to set up and implement, and in my opinion is probably the most far off in the future sci-fi solution out of all of these. How would you determine what acts of volunteering get compensated how much? Would you trust an AI to properly do it? Then this could lead to a very slippery slope situation where we're just a few steps away from a total dystopian social credit score scenario. So while it's a great idea in theory and would allow people to find a sense of purpose and fulfillment if work became obsolete, practical implementation would be a significant challenge and would take a lot of discussion to figure out how do we do it without devolving into a dystopian social credit system. Conclusion: Gen Z doesn't have to be cooked. The future doesn't have to be cooked. It only seems that way because we're so obsessed and so brainwashed with the idea that everyone should be forced to work. Once you remove that mental block, however, you realize that freeing humanity from the prison of work is actually very promising and very inspiring for the future. Now, if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, there's a very dark, disturbing psyop behind the history of work. It was used as a psychological manipulation tactic to enslave people for centuries, and we explore this more in depth in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.